Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Election day, believe it or not, only 20 days away, and more than 10 million Americans have already voted. At this point, 4 years ago, as a frame of reference, only a fraction of that amount have gone to the polls at this point. Now, tonight, one of the numbers gurus at 5:38, they'll join us to discuss their election forecasts. I'll give you a hint, not good for the Donald. Also, the head of one of the leading advocacy groups when it comes to women reproductive rights, she'll join us to explain why Amy Coney Barrett concerns her and the women that she represents. Plus, an update on the COVID outbreak, including some of the dire numbers and the projections we're seeing as we approach flu season. Now, we're going to begin, though, with the confirmation hearings of Judge Coney Barrett as senators question the Supreme Court nominee for the second straight day. Today, lawmakers getting their final crack at questioning Judge Amy Coney Barrett before her expected vote out of the Judiciary Committee.
That was Justice Scalia. So I share his philosophy, but I've never said that I would always reach the same outcome as he did.
Senate Republicans working to portray Judge Barrett as an independent jurist without an agenda and who is able to separate her personal beliefs from her judicial rulings.
From a conservative point of view, generally speaking, we want legislative bodies to make laws, not judges. Is that correct?
That is correct.
For Democrats, the line of inquiry has largely focused on major Supreme Court decisions like the Affordable Care Act and Roe v. Wade and how she might potentially rule in the future. But Judge Barrett, she's largely declined to answer.
I don't think I've answered any legal hypotheticals.
The hearings have been mostly civil with a few impassioned clashes.
All these questions, you're suggesting that I have animus or that I cut a deal with the president, and I was very clear yesterday that that isn't what happened.
But despite some efforts to establish Judge Barrett as a right-wing ideologue, her confirmation seems all but certain, as was evident by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island.
When you go up to the court, you will be not subject to the code of ethics that you're subject to now.
President Trump has previously suggested that he could unilaterally change the date of the election, a power that resides exclusively with Congress, but for a second straight day, Judge Barrett declined to answer that question.
Does the Constitution give the President of the United States the authority to unilaterally delay a general election under any circumstances?
It would be inappropriate for me to make a comment, and I don't think I've answered any legal hypotheticals in keeping with the Justice Ginsburg rule.
I want to bring my first guest, one of the people who vote on this, Senator Bob Casey, a Democrat from Pennsylvania. Senator, let's start off with the confirmation process and what you've heard to this point. For many of us, we're hearing about super precedents, which is great that we're not going to re-examine Brown versus Board, but what seemed very clear doesn't reach that category are things like the Affordable Care Act and even a president's possibility in deciding when to call an election or not. How concerned have you not heard what you needed to hear from this candidate?
Richard, thanks very much for having me. Number one is, I think from the beginning, from the outset of this process, the leading reason why this nomination is being rushed is because if the confirmation isn't completed by the November 10th argument, where the Supreme Court will hear arguments, I should say, on both sides of the Affordable Care Act, that new justice could not participate. So the rush is about getting a justice in place to be able to be the deciding vote on the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, to strike it down, to declare it unconstitutional, thereby rendering uninsured more than 1 million Pennsylvanians, and 5.5 million people in our state that have a pre-existing condition would lose those protections. But I think she was nominated for that fundamental purpose. I think the Affordable Care Act lawsuit is the most important matter the Supreme Court will decide in the next 25 years.
I could argue, Senator, they might have something even before the 10th, which is the election itself. She was pressing that directly about where a president can or can't get involved, and I got no clarity on that. She certainly hasn't given any nod as to whether or not she'll recuse herself if the case were to come before her, if she's confirmed before November 3rd, but she wouldn't even answer whether or not a president can pardon himself. I got to tell you, as somebody who's been following the election every day, and if I take the president at his word that it's going to go to the Supreme Court, shouldn't we all be concerned as to how much 9 people conceivably can decide a free and fair election?
We should all be concerned, especially with regard not only to the president's words, where he, in addition to what you recited accurately, he also said he wants the Supreme Court to, quote, count the ballots. That is proof positive that he believes he can litigate the result all the way up to the Supreme Court and get a favorable decision for him politically by virtue of the fact that he's made several appointments, or will have made several appointments that will rule in his favor. But look, this nominee, as you indicated, couldn't answer the basic question on the election, could also or would not answer the basic question about the peaceful transfer of power. These are constitutional requirements, constitutional imperatives, and I would hope that a nominee for the Supreme Court would be able to respond to something that is so rooted in our Constitution that it should never be the subject of any kind of doubt, or certainly not the subject of the kind of undermining the president has undertaken.
I know you're familiar with what your colleague, Senator Romney, put out there, and I think he speaks for many, where he's concerned about where this country is going in terms of just how angry it's getting. And while he did point the finger at the president, he seemed to indicate that all sides are to be blamed here. Leaving out the false equivalency for a second, I'm curious, and you don't have to name names, but when the cameras aren't on and you talk to your Republican colleagues in the Senate, how concerned are they, both with what we've seen Trump's capable of doing, if the election doesn't go his way, just how dangerous things could get? And I'm curious, is there a line that they won't cross either in going to get along with this president?
Well, I think on the first part of your question, I think the short answer is not enough. They're not enough concerned. Not enough of them are concerned to the extent that they would say something publicly. I will say, though, that in the aftermath of an election, I think there'll be a lot of Republican members of Congress who heretofore have not said much, but I think are likely to stand up for the rule of law, the finality of an election.
We as mentioned, the super precedent idea that there are certain things that are settled in this country. If the court starts, and there's a bunch of issues, gay marriage, one example of them, where 2/3, 70% of the public is firmly in support of something, and the court were to undo it, the idea of court packing has come up. And while Biden, I know yourself, aren't crazy about the idea, Vice President Biden hasn't ruled it out. Do you believe that's politics, or are there enough Democrats that think that McConnell has really scammed the system, if you will, here on how the court has been made up, and that they consider changing the number of justices to a number bigger than 9?
Richard, I think there's going to be a robust debate about that if this nomination is successful. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that she is confirmed. By virtue of taking the country through this rush process, if Leader McConnell is successful in that, he will have changed unalterably the nature of the Senate. He started that when he changed the rule on Supreme Court justices only requiring 51 votes. I think for a lifetime appointment to the most powerful court in the world, you ought to at least be able to rack up 60 votes out of 100. But he's changed that. And I think also it has caused some of us to be open to the idea of listening, at a minimum, listening to arguments about expanding the Supreme Court. I think we're a long way from that, but I think because of Mitch McConnell, and frankly, aided and abetted by Donald Trump, we have to consider changes that, as you pointed to earlier, will help us better reflect the will of the American people.
Final question, Senator, your home state. We saw the president there yesterday, another maskless largely event, even though the numbers are going the wrong direction with COVID in Pennsylvania. But he's there because obviously it's an important state, but he's also, if you believe the polls, trailing badly. What's your sense? Election today, you comfortable that Pennsylvania goes blue on November 3rd?
Here's the reason I think the vice president's in a strong position. There are several. Number one is people know him in Pennsylvania, and they have a favorable impression of his not just his service and his experience, but his character. I think in the last month and a half or 2 months, they've heard a lot more from him, from Vice President Biden, about the two issues they're most concerned about. Number one is the virus. How are you going to tackle this virus and get us back on track? Secondly, the vice president has a Build Back Better plan. And in Pennsylvania, when we have the highest unemployment rate in our state since November of 1983, they're hearing from Joe Biden a strategy to get us out of the ditch economically, to build back better, and they're hearing from him about the virus. On the other side, they have a really bad example about how to conduct yourself as a public official in a once in 100-year pandemic, and he's got no plan for the virus.
Senator Casey, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone, when we come back, we're going to show you more highlights from today's hearing, and then we're going to break down what we heard and what we saw and what we still have to learn.